Our reading this week is in John chapter 8. If you want to grab your Bible and head over there to John chapter 8, we're actually going to begin not with something that is in the text, but with something that is in the margin of the text. And since it is there, we ought to at least comment about it. You may have a note. Mine is connected to verse 53 of chapter 7.
Yeah, that's 753 to 811 is the usual mark.
That's a later MSS manuscripts. Add the story of the adulterous woman, numbering it as John 7:53 through 8:11. So the reason we want to comment on this is because, well, a couple of reasons. One, it's here, and we need to make some sense out of it. And two, anytime you start talking about whether or not something should be in the text or not, people are going to freak out about that.
Yeah.
And I think that folks want textual criticism, trying to decide about what does and does not belong in the text. It just freaks people out because it sounds like what you're saying is, well, the Bible has mistakes in it and we can't really know what God was saying. So It's worth pausing here and commenting over this so that people don't freak out about that. But we may have to burst some myths to do that.
Well, yeah, the Bible was copied by hand for, 1,500 years, give or take.
Correct.
And so when you copy by hand, mistakes happen in the manuscripts when you're copying by hand. Some of them, the vast majority are unintentional. Occasionally, there's a couple of mischievous scribes in the history of the biblical text, but those guys are usually those kind of manuscripts are usually pretty easily noticed that they are tampered with because they are so far out of sorts. But most of it's unintentional.
So in this case, the question is, was this story, this actually rather famous story about the woman taken in adultery,
right?
Was that originally part of John and in this place?
It does not seem to be so. No, that's the catch, and that's why so many modern translations will either asterisk, footnote, or sometimes, especially with this story, even in the text, like my ESV has it marked in the text, flat, not even a footnote. Mm-hmm. The earliest manuscripts do not include this story. And so, there is a hard and uncomfortable truth that, maybe we should do a podcast sometimes on textual criticism and how all this really works.
Right.
But no, the story
because I think it freaks people out when you say that.
It does, absolutely. But really, what people should be encouraged by is the fact that our state of the knowledge of the manuscripts of the Bible is such that, as one textual critical scholar put it one time, we're basically certain now that we actually can identify the text exactly as it left the hands of the apostles, since it left the hands of the apostles in the first century. Yeah. So all the accidents and misspellings and typos of the centuries, we have now through modern communication technology, digitization, being able to look at pretty much everything that every library has everywhere, identify the authentic text of Scripture.
Well, let's start with the fact that the only reason that everyone isn't aware of this is simply because they haven't taken the trouble to read right there in the margin where it says. So one of the important things I think to say is that where there is a question of whether or not something is original or there may be some uncertainty about it, the people who produce the Bible are very careful to note that, demonstrating that nobody's trying to pull something over on anybody. No one's hiding anything, that translators are quite honest about where there is some kind of a question.
Right.
And shining, in essence, instead of glossing it over, shining a light on it.
Right. And the other thing is that, the translations that many of us use are actually produced by relatively conservative scholars, the New American Standard, the New King James, the ESV, what have you. And so these are not folks who are given to tearing down, the authority of God for its own sake. These are folks who are actually doing this very conscientiously. And the other thing is, it's not any one denomination, it's not any one cult, it's not any one sect, it's not any one singular scholar. This is like literally, experts across the religious spectrum, across the world, across language groups, whatever, recognize that there's a thing here. So rather than being troubled by it, we should actually be encouraged that we can have we should be actually confident the Bible sitting in your lap really is what God intended for us to have.
Right.
The other thing I would add is people get nervous about this is when you actually consider the story.
It's of no consequence.
That's at the end of the day.
Either way, it's of no consequence.
At the end of the day, the bottom line takeaway of this story writ large is Jesus calls out the woman for her sin. You need to stop it. Go your way and sin no more. And he calls out the hypocrisy of her accusers. Right. And that sounds like a lot of other stories in the Gospels where Jesus both tells the Samaritan woman earlier in this Gospel, yeah, and I know that guy you're with right now isn't your husband. So he calls out her sexual sinfulness, her history, while at the same time, obviously in this very chapter we're reading today, calls out the religious leaders for their hypocrisy, thinking they're children of Abraham, but they're actually of the devil.
Right.
So, at the end of the day, literally understanding the will of God for who we are and what we're supposed to be is not at stake in this.
Yeah, that's such an important point to emphasize, because when we encounter these places where there is some question or some uncertainty, and there are a few places like that. First of all, the very small number is
Very
in
small.
and of itself impressive.
Very small.
But secondly, you're talking about inconsequential places. Not that the truth there doesn't matter, but if this story were removed, you don't lose anything.
And that's the key, David.
And if the story's added, you don't gain anything that you don't have in other places. I mean, the story's not going to change anything if you put it in, and if you remove it, it's not going to change anything. It's not that it's an important story. They're in value to it. It's just that the ideas here are taught throughout Scripture. They're not unique to this place.
And to just kind of put a bow on that exact idea, I remember having a professor years ago talking about this kind of stuff. And I've never forgotten the way he phrased it. He said, God in his providence, knowing the power of his word, his intentions for giving the human race his word, and at the same time knowing, as he put it, the propensity for human bumbling, that even unintentionally we're going to make mistakes copying by hand or whatnot. The way the professor put it was God, gave us a word that is insulated against human bumbling. And in other words, no crucial truth of Scripture is taught in only one place. And not to mention that, for those of us who take God seriously, God can't providentially superintend that what we need to know is undoubtedly incorruptibly preserved.
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, let not your heart be troubled.
Yes.
There is nothing at stake in this question in and of itself.
Well, some really, really important ideas all the way through this chapter.
Right.
A couple of things just to highlight for people. If you go down to verse 12, we have this idea of Jesus being the light of the world.
Right.
One of a couple of important claims that are going to be made in the text. So let's start with that, talk about the light of the world.
Yeah, so, number one, chapter breaks are always in the wrong place. Always is a dangerous one, often in the wrong place.
It would be easier for Jeff to note the chapter breaks that he likes than those he does not like.
Right. And so when you also kind of pull out the little hiccup there of or the kind of the digression of the woman taken in adultery, and just so you're back to just reading the flow from chapter 7, into chapter 8:12 there, you've still got Jesus at the Feast of Tabernacles. And so just like we talked about last week where Jesus, talking about I'm living water, riffing off of one of the rituals that they had come up with for the Feast of Tabernacles in their own time, this water ritual, and basically I am the water from the wilderness, I am the eternal water of life. He's doing the same thing with a even less Old Testament biblical ritual they had invented by that point, where they burned lamps in the temple at night during the feast. And so Jesus is again kind of, I am the true light. I think about Revelation, ironically another writing of the inspired Apostle John, in which there is no need for the sun in eternity because God is the light. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, again, the Apostle John, different work, but same, John coming back to this fundamental, God is the ultimate source and meaning of light. So Jesus is again riffing off of the ritual they had in the Feast of Tabernacles at that time, but basically saying, I am the light in the darkness that you're looking for, not this ritual.
Yeah, and in fact, he plays off that idea throughout the gospel. I mean, he
light and dark all the way through. Yeah,
light and dark all the way through. That's exactly true. So the contrast to him being the light is the darkness that overwhelms the world, that he comes into the world and shines as the light. And by the way, if we just tuck the Sermon on the Mount into that too, invites us to display his light.
Yeah.
And to be like him in that way.
And I do think as well, you really can read what he's about to say here, I am the light of the world, and where this conversation goes, through a lot of the rest of the chapter with them, kind of arguing over, Father Abraham versus your father's the devil. You can read a lot of this against what Jesus had previously said in John chapter 3, where, the reason the world doesn't come to the light is because its deeds are evil and the light exposes them. And so literally you almost have it kind of John the apostle and what he's inspired to select to put in about the story of Jesus and Jesus' teaching, circling back to that concept quite vividly and demonstrating that in the nature of this conversation where they talk about, your will is not to know God's will. That's, Jesus is saying to them, that's why you can't see this or won't see this. Very much a fleshing out of what Jesus had previously said in John 3 about people preferring darkness over light.
Yep. Yep. And then in verse 31 and 32,
Yep.
also a familiar text. If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's another critical idea that, and then he goes on to say in 36, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. And so the truth will make you free, the Son will make you free. The idea that connects all that together is freedom.
Yeah, and so there's a lot going on. Like so much of John's gospel in general, it's very simple to read on one level, very simple language, but profound, interconnected, interwoven thoughts. And so truth is another one of those themes in John's gospel. Pilate will famously say, unique to John's gospel, what is truth, when he's confronted by Jesus. So yeah, there was this whole idea of Jesus as truth and revealing truth on the table all the way through. And what you have to understand when you read the word truth, especially in John's gospel, but often in the Bible in general, is we hear that word truth as just something that's not false. But the deeper sense, I think, of the biblical concept of truth, especially here, is Jesus as ultimate reality. In fact, full of grace and truth, all the way back in John chapter 1, the coming of the Word made flesh, full of grace and truth. Ultimate reality. Truth is what is actually real, as opposed to, whether we're, deceived or intentionally duplicitous, what is false. Truth is what is real. And so Jesus, when he says, I've come to give you reality, the reality about God, about yourself, about right and wrong, but I've come to give you ultimate reality. And because if I give you a vision of ultimate reality, you really will be free. See, they're still thinking too small. They're thinking in terms of the world, the cosmos in Greek, which is why when Jesus says in verse 32, you'll know the truth will make you free. Well, in verse 33, they famously say, we've never been enslaved to anyone. We're children of Abraham, which is laughable.
So you got to wonder, in what sense do they mean that's true?
Well, that's it.
Because they're literally, in a sense, enslaved to Rome, even as this is being written.
The whole accusation of Pilate in a few pages is going to be, or the way they try to get Pilate involved is he makes himself out to be a king. Well, why do they need a revolt? Because they're, exactly. It's almost laughable. Let alone, their entire history, their foundational story is the Exodus. When God, so anyways, children of Abraham have been enslaved quite often in their history, actually. So again, just that hard heart, that darkness, that refusal to listen to light and truth, reality. That pushback is a sign of they don't want reality. They don't want to face reality. You are in not just under Roman oppression, but you are spiritually oppressed, even if you are children of Abraham. I'm here to give you the truth about that.
Yeah, you harp on that a lot in your teaching, this idea of men not accepting reality. And that does have an important tie to our culture today, because we have seen such a vivid demonstration of people rejecting, for example, biological reality. So we have the transgender controversy because people have abandoned, oddly enough, we move quickly through the science phase, right, where science is the ultimate arbiter of truth, to suddenly rejecting science and in the process denying reality, what is real. He goes on in this chapter in verse 44 to talk about the devil being the father of lies.
Right.
And in a sense, it is the devil that is trying to get us to embrace what is not real, to embrace his lies.
From literally Genesis 3, when talking to Eve, he says, you will not die. That is a complete distortion of reality. Eve is dead today.
Even more fundamental than that I'm looking out for you and God isn't.
Right, yeah.
All the evidence around them.
Completely skewing their view of God, of reality, that's right.
Yeah, and all the evidence around them to show God's care for them. You would think, how in the world could he convince her of that?
Right. And so even David, circling back to what you said a moment ago about just this is still the way it is today with science, people thought science would ultimately be the bulwark against postmodern craziness, that there is no objective truth. Because science, 2 + 2 is 4 and gravity is gravity. But what we've seen in recent years is literally, with the transgenderism, to your point, is even what you would have previously considered objective reality, indisputably objective reality, the truth of the matter is it's not about objectivity. It's about will. This is part of what John's gospel, and even this very conversation here in John chapter 8, what Jesus is getting at is, this is about the fact that if you don't want to live in reality, if you want to have your own way and your own will, reality won't get in the way of that. You can absolutely believe a lie and convince yourself of a lie if you do not want to live in the light of God's truth.
Science was merely a means to an end, and that was, it allowed me to do what I want to do. And there is the fundamental struggle.
Yes.
And you described it as will, but that is exactly and always has been the issue with mankind. I want to do it my way, and if science is in the way, if God is in the way, whatever I have to reject to do what I want to do. It's the fundamental human struggle.
That's it. When science is giving me power over nature to do what I want with it, whether it's, modern medicine and its ability to heal, whether it's, electronics and electricity, when science was giving me power over nature to bend it to my will, that's great. When science gets in the way of my will, when I want to do whatever I want to sexually, biologically, whatever, then I will redefine science and get on with asserting my will over reality.
Dump that too. Okay, one more.
Yep.
At the end of John 8, we have this, Jesus brings up Abraham. Verse 56, I rejoice to see my day. Yeah. And of course, again, responds or elicits a response from his enemies, how could Abraham have rejoiced to see your day? And Jesus in verse 58 uses that famous line, before Abraham was born, I am. And that language is loaded with significance. That's Exodus.
There's a reason they picked up rocks immediately when he said that.
Because clearly they recognize that that this is a God claim.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. It's exactly from Moses in the burning bush. I am. Moses. What is your name? When the people you want me to go deliver ask me, what's your name? My name is I am. And so, he's claiming to be Yahweh of the Old Testament, and that's a stunning claim. As much as all the other signs, John's gospel, these miracles and teachings, these signs of who he is, this is probably the most forward of them all yet, and absolutely, floors them. Though the irony is, he really is. The ultimate point of the Abrahamic promise was, that God's covenant with Abraham was, through you all nations of the world will be blessed. This is the ultimate seed of Abraham, Jesus of Nazareth. Paul will make that point in Galatians 3. Wasn't a plural seed ultimately, it was the singular seed, the one. And here he is. This is literally what Abraham longed for and desired, and so much so that he is the God of Abraham. Right. He's not just the seed of Abraham, he's the God of Abraham. I am. And what a claim.
Yeah, well, and then you tie it together, light, truth, God, right? The three ideas, you tie them together, and he culminates though with this one, and rightly bringing this in at the end, I think, because you'll like this. The easiest way to bait Jeff is with Genesis, right? So here we go. This is back to Creator.
Sure.
The reason that I'm right about this is because I am the one who made you, and so this is where he bumps up against our will, and this is that whole authority issue we talk about over and over again.
Right.
Jesus speaks as God.
Right.
And that's why what he says is truth. That's why what he says is the light, because he speaks to us as God. And yes, the response of the creation to the Creator is to bow the knee.
Right.
And so I think by making this claim at the end, he's just striking to the heart of the struggle.
Right.
If you believe this, it changes everything.
And to that point, you remember how the Gospel of John uniquely begins. It begins with a Genesis riff. In the beginning was the Word. And then he goes a step further. The Word was God. And so that's the thing is, since a reader of the Gospel shouldn't be surprised Jesus is saying this at this point, because we were told at the very beginning in the opening verses that this is a Genesis story where the Creator is going to recreate. Remember, he says to Nicodemus, he's going to be born again. We're going to do this again. We're going to get this right. We're going to fix this. This is a Genesising of the world. And I know
I think
that's
he
not in
made
the
up that.
dictionary.
Y'all Google that and check him
That
on
is
that.
not in the dictionary.
Genesising.
But he's going to recreate. He's going to restart. People are going to be born again. He's going to reset and fix this. And he's going to do that as God, but now just not from God merely speaking, but from God coming to earth as one of us and living in the story, not just speaking the story. It's powerful.
Yeah. So one way to read the chapter, I think that is useful, is to watch the back and forth, because intermingled with these claims are protests from his opposition. And so as you read John 8 this week and you're trying to knit all this together, just think sometimes the Jews are speaking, sometimes Jesus is speaking, and you've got this back and forth. Candidly, kind of like an argument back and forth
absolutely.
between Jesus and his opponents as he ups the claim as he goes all the way through this. So watch for those three fundamentals and watch the back and forth as you spend some time reading John 8 this week.